Imagine a bride in a cathedral, veil shimmering with family heirlooms, about to say vows. Then she exposes her groom's vile texts about her body and their criminal scheme in front of 300 guests. What happens next will shock you. Anya's story is one you can't unhear.
Thanks for having me, Eliza. It's tough reliving that day, but I'm glad to share how I fought back against the lies. Let's dive into the truth of what happened. My name is Anya Kowalski, and I was raised to believe that a wedding day was the most sacred moment in a woman's life. Growing up in a tight-knit Polish-American family on Chicago's Northwest Side, I watched my babcia carefully preserve her own mother's wedding dress in tissue paper, telling me stories about true love that survived wars and ocean crossings. She would hold my small hands in her weathered ones and tell me about courage, how sometimes you have to fight for what's right, even when the whole world seems against you. At 26, with my ash blonde hair that caught the light just right and green eyes that my father always said reminded him of spring meadows back in Krakow, I thought I had found my own fairy tale. Mark Jablonski seemed perfect on paper. Third-generation Polish-American like me, but from the wealthy North Shore suburbs. His family owned a chain of successful electronics stores across the Midwest. When he proposed at the Polish Cultural Center during the Harvest Festival, with my entire extended family watching and crying happy tears, I felt like I was living in one of Babcia's stories. The wedding planning consumed 18 months of my life. We chose St. Adalbert's Cathedral, the most beautiful Polish church in the city, where my grandparents had been married in 1952. My dress was custom-made by a seamstress in the old neighborhood, incorporating lace from my great-grandmother's veil, the same lace that had traveled across an ocean in a wooden trunk, representing 4 generations of women who believed in forever. Every detail mattered because this wasn't just my wedding. It was a celebration of 4 generations of Polish dreams finally coming true in America. My parents, who had worked double shifts their entire lives, dad as a machinist, mom cleaning office buildings at night, were spending their life savings on this day. The $200,000 celebration included $50,000 on catering featuring traditional Polish dishes my aunts would prepare, $30,000 on the cathedral and reception venue, $25,000 on flowers and music, and the remaining funds on photography, my dress, and accommodations for relatives flying in from Poland. They had saved an additional $80,000 to give us as a down payment on a house, their way of ensuring their daughter would never struggle like they had. Mark's family was contributing an equal amount, turning our wedding into a celebration that would be talked about in our community for years. But as the big day approached, tiny cracks began to show in my perfect fairy tale. 3 weeks before the wedding, I started noticing changes in Mark's behavior that made my stomach twist with unease. He'd always been charming and attentive, but suddenly he seemed distracted, constantly checking his phone and whispering with his best man, Chad Miller. Chad was everything my family distrusted, entitled, crude, and dismissive of anyone he considered beneath his social status. I had watched Mark enter his phone passcode countless times during our 2-year relationship, our anniversary date, 8/14, never thinking I'd need to remember it for anything other than romantic sentiment. During our rehearsal dinner at the Polish-American Cultural Center, Mark made a toast that left me cold. "To my beautiful Anya," he said, raising his champagne glass to our 150 guests, "who's teaching me that sometimes the best things come in simple packages." The way he emphasized simple, while glancing at my parents, made my cheeks burn with shame. When my mother heard this, I saw her face fall slightly before she forced a smile. Later that evening, as my aunt served homemade pierogi that had taken them 2 days to prepare, pierogi that represented generations of family recipes, I overheard Mark describing them to his college friends as charming peasant food. When my babcia, dressed in her finest dress and proudly wearing her late husband's purple heart pin, approached to give Mark a traditional Polish blessing with bread and salt, he tolerated her broken English with barely concealed impatience. I watched him check his phone even during her sacred words. But what truly chilled me was a moment I caught between Mark and Chad near the bar. Chad was scrolling through his phone, showing Mark something that made them both laugh in a way that felt cruel and secretive. When Mark noticed me approaching, he quickly grabbed Chad's wrist, forcing him to lower the phone. "Not here," Mark muttered, and they separated like guilty children caught in mischief. That night, lying in my childhood bedroom for the last time, staring at the glow-in-the-dark stars I'd stuck to the ceiling in high school, I tried to convince myself that Mark was just nervous. Wedding jitters were normal, right? Everyone said the groom always got cold feet. But deep in my heart, where Babsha had taught me to listen for truth like she listened for air raid sirens during the war, something felt terribly wrong. The morning of our wedding dawned crisp and clear. A perfect October day with golden leaves dancing outside the cathedral windows. I arrived at the church at 10 a.m. for photos, my hair styled in an intricate braided crown that took my hairdresser 3 hours to perfect, a style my Babsha had worn on her own wedding day. The bridal suite at St. Adalbert's was a small room behind the altar, traditionally used for brides to have their final moments of preparation before walking down the aisle to begin their new lives. Mark had stopped by around 11:30 to give me a quick kiss. "Bad luck be damned," he said, and left his phone charging on the antique dresser while he went to check on the groomsmen. His phone was always attached to his hand like a lifeline, so leaving it behind seemed strange, but I was too focused on my final preparations to think much about it. I was adjusting the great-grandmother's lace on my veil, thinking about the Oxypinny ceremony we'd planned for later, when Chad's message lit up the screen. "You sure you want to go through with this? Last chance to back out, lol." My blood turned to ice water. My hands began to shake as I stared at those words. It was probably just a joke between friends, I told myself. Guys always made stupid jokes about marriage, especially guys like Chad. But something in my gut, that same instinct that had warned me about Mark's behavior at the rehearsal dinner, screamed that this was more than just pre-wedding banter. I remembered Babsha's words about courage, about fighting for what's right even when it's terrifying. His passcode was our anniversary, 8/14. The irony of that detail would haunt me later, using the date of our first kiss to unlock the messages that would destroy our future. What I found in his messages destroyed everything I thought I knew about the man I was about to marry. The conversation with Chad went back months, a chronicle of lies and betrayal that made me physically sick. The messages between Mark and Chad were like poison spreading through my veins, each word more devastating than the last. "Chad, how's the bride? Not having second thoughts?" Mark, "Nah, she's too in love to see anything. It's kinda sad TBH." Chad, "Still think she's boring in bed?" Mark, "Dude, her pussy is so boring LOL, like missionary with the lights off. Thank God I won't have to pretend much longer." The sexual humiliation was devastating, but it got worse. Mark, "Her little photography hobby is so cute, like watching a kid play with finger paints. She actually thinks she's artistic." Chad, "What about her family?" Mark, "They're exactly what you'd expect. Her dad sounds like a cartoon character with that accent, and her mom still cleans toilets for a living. But they're loaded from saving every penny like good little immigrants." I had to sit down on the small velvet chair, my wedding dress pooling around me like spilled cream, the beautiful fabric suddenly feeling like a costume in a play I never auditioned for. But as devastating as those messages were about my body, my dreams, and my family's hard-earned success, they weren't the worst of it. Scrolling further back, I found conversations that revealed Mark wasn't just a cheater and a cruel snob, he was a criminal. Chad, "The warehouse job went smooth. 30 high-end cameras, clean serial numbers." Mark, "Perfect. My contact at the electronics distributor will take them all for 40% of retail. Easy money." Chad, "Where are we storing the next shipment?" Mark, "That's the beautiful part. Anya's dad is buying us a house with a detached garage. She thinks it's going to be her art studio for her cute little photography business. She'll never question what's really happening in there." The casual way they discussed using my father's money to facilitate their crimes, the way they mocked my dreams while planning to destroy my family's reputation, it was beyond betrayal. It was a calculated destruction of everything I held dear. The messages between Mark and Chad revealed a sophisticated operation that had been running for over 2 years. They had connections with warehouse workers who would stage accidents where boxes of high-end electronics would fall off trucks or disappear during inventory transfers. Mark's family's legitimate electronics stores provided the perfect cover. They could claim the stolen goods were refurbished items or overstock from suppliers. The profits were enormous. They were talking about $50,000 shipments arriving weekly, with Mark's cut being around $20,000 per month. But what made my blood boil was their detailed plan for our future. Mark had specifically targeted me not just for my family's money, but because my father was buying us a house with a detached garage that would serve as their new storage and distribution facility. Mark, the shipment of cameras came in yesterday. 50 units, all high-end DSLRs. Your contact at the warehouse says he can get us twice that next month. Chad, nice. The storage unit is getting risky. Too many people asking questions. Mark, not a problem much longer. The house Anya's dad is buying us has a perfect setup. Detached garage, private driveway, and the best part, she thinks it's for her art studio. She has no idea the whole operation is about to be run out of her own damn house. Chad, what if she gets suspicious? Mark, she won't. Polish girls are raised to be obedient wives. She'll never question what I'm doing, and even if she notices something, she'll just assume it's legitimate business from my family's stores. Chad, and if the cops ever come sniffing around? Mark, her family's clean record will be perfect cover. Who's going to suspect the hardworking immigrant family? That last exchange broke something fundamental inside me. The casual racism, the assumption that I was too stupid and submissive to notice what was happening in my own home, the complete disregard for how their illegal activities would destroy my family if we were caught, it was beyond betrayal. They were planning to use my family's reputation and my father's life savings to commit crimes that could send us all to prison. I took screenshots of everything. Every cruel joke about my family's accents, every message to other women, every detail of their criminal operation, including warehouse locations, contact names, and shipment schedules. Then, I forwarded the most damning evidence to my own phone and did something that would change the course of this day forever. With 45 minutes until the ceremony, I had a choice to make. I could confront Mark privately, call off the wedding, and deal with the humiliation and financial devastation quietly. Or I could ensure that everyone, our families, our friends, our entire community, saw exactly who Mark Jablonski really was. The second option terrified me, but it was the only one that felt like justice. My parents had spent their life savings on this wedding. My extended family had traveled from across the country and from Poland itself. Mark had made a mockery of everything we held sacred, and he needed to face the consequences in front of everyone who mattered to us. I sent the criminal evidence to the local police department's tip line, along with our wedding venue address, the warehouse locations mentioned in the texts, and a simple message. The suspects will be here at 3:15 p.m. for a wedding ceremony. You will find stolen goods at this secondary address. I included the address of the house my father was buying for us, along with the garage access code Mark had shared with Chad. Then I found Father Kowalski in the vestry, reviewing his notes for the ceremony. Father Kowalski had baptized me, given me my first communion, and confirmed me. He had known my family for 3 generations, had blessed my grandparents' marriage and my parents' marriage. When I showed him just one message, the one where Mark called Polish girls obedient and discussed using our home for criminal activities, the color drained from his kind, weathered face. "My child," he said, his voice heavy with sorrow and understanding, "what do you need me to do?" "I need you to let me speak my truth during the vows," I said, my voice steady despite the earthquake happening in my chest. "And I need you to alert church security that police may need to enter if things get out of hand." Father Kowalski studied my face for a long moment, seeing something there that reminded him of my babsha during the war years. Then he nodded slowly. "I will do what I can to support you, but are you certain this is the path you want to take?" "Father," I said, thinking of my babsha's stories about courage in the face of impossible odds, about standing up to bullies even when they wore uniforms. Sometimes the only way forward is through the fire. He placed his gentle hand on my head in blessing. "Then may God give you strength, child." At 3:15 p.m., the organ began playing Pachelbel's Canon in D, and I took my father's arm for what I knew would be the most important walk of my life. The cathedral was packed with 300 guests, every pew filled with people who loved me and wanted to see me happy. Relatives had flown in from Krakow, Chicago's entire Polish-American community seemed to be represented, and the afternoon sun streamed through the stained glass windows, casting rainbow patterns across the stone floor like a blessing from heaven itself. My father, dressed in the first tuxedo he'd ever owned, squeezed my hand as we began our procession down the aisle. "You look beautiful, Kochani," he whispered, using the Polish endearment he'd called me since childhood. "I'm so proud of you." If only he knew what was coming. Mark stood at the altar looking devastatingly handsome in his custom-tailored tuxedo, his dark hair perfectly styled, his smile confident and charming. Chad stood beside him as best man, occasionally checking his own phone with what I now recognized as nervous energy. Neither of them had any idea that their text conversation was about to become very, very public. As I reached the altar and my father lifted my veil to kiss my cheek, a moment I had dreamed about since childhood, Mark's eyes met mine. For just a moment, I saw something flicker across his face, confusion, perhaps, at the expression in my green eyes. I wasn't looking at him with love and adoration like the blushing bride he expected. I was looking at him like a predator who had finally cornered her prey. Father Kowalski began the ceremony with traditional words about the sanctity of marriage, the importance of truth and fidelity, and the sacred bond being formed before God and community. He spoke about the Polish tradition of marriage as a covenant not just between two people, but between two families, two histories, two futures becoming one. Every word felt like a knife twisting in my chest, but I stood perfectly still, my hands steady, my breathing controlled. When it came time for the vows, Mark went first. He pulled out a folded piece of paper and began reading words about eternal love, partnership, and devotion. He spoke about honoring my family's traditions and protecting me always. He promised to be faithful, honest, and true until death parted us. The congregation sighed with romantic appreciation. My mother dabbed at her eyes with her handkerchief. Several aunts whispered "peekney" under their breath. It was a beautiful performance. Every word was a lie. Then Father Kowalski turned to me. "Anya, do you have your vows?" This was it, the moment that would either destroy me or set me free. I thought of my babcia's stories about courage, about the resistance fighters who risked everything to stand up to evil. I thought of my parents' sacrifices, their dreams for my future that Mark had planned to steal and corrupt. "I do," I said, my voice ringing clearly through the cathedral. Instead of pulling out the handwritten vows I'd spent weeks perfecting, I reached into my bouquet and extracted Mark's phone. A confused murmur rippled through the congregation like wind through wheat. Mark's confident smile faltered. Chad went pale as fresh snow. "I thought," I announced, my voice carrying to every corner of the sacred space, that instead of reading my own vows, I would share Mark's real feelings about our marriage, the ones he texted to his best man, Chad. The cathedral fell into absolute silence. You could have heard a pin drop on the marble floor. Mark's face went white, then red, then white again. "Anya, what are you?" to Chad, I continued, reading directly from the phone. Mark wrote, "She's too in love to see anything. It's kinda sad TBH." Gasps erupted from the pews like steam from a kettle. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. Mark's mother looked like she'd been struck by lightning. My babcia sat perfectly still, but I could see the fire building in her eyes. But I wasn't finished, not even close. He also wrote, "Her pussy is so boring LOL, like missionary with the lights off. Thank God I won't have to pretend much longer." The gasps turned to shocked cries and angry murmurs. Several elderly relatives crossed themselves. My father's face darkened with a fury I'd never seen before, his hands clenching into fists. Mark tried to step toward me, his hands reaching for the phone. "Anya, stop this. You don't understand." "Oh, but I do understand," I said, stepping back and continuing to read. "I understand that you told Chad my photography hobby was like watching a kid play with finger paints. I understand that you said my father sounds like a cartoon character and my mother still cleans toilets for a living. I understand that you called Polish girls obedient and plan to use my family's reputation to cover your crimes." The congregation erupted. People were standing up, shouting in Polish and English. My uncle Stanislaw was restrained by two cousins as he tried to charge the altar, but I raised my voice above the chaos. "Most of all, I understand your business plan," Chad bolted. He actually tried to run, pushing past the groomsmen and heading for a side exit. But Father Kowalski had alerted security, and two uniformed police officers appeared at the cathedral doors, blocking his escape. The sirens were audible now, growing louder as more police cars arrived. "You see," I continued, my voice growing stronger with each word, "Mark and Chad have been running a very profitable business selling stolen electronics, and they plan to use the garage of the house my father is buying for us as their new storage facility." I was supposed to think it was being converted into an art studio for my cute little photography business. Red and blue lights flashed through the stained glass windows, painting the saints in the colors of justice. Mark's composure finally shattered completely. "You stupid bitch," he screamed, lunging for me. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" My father moved faster than I'd ever seen him move, intercepting Mark and slamming him against the altar rail. "You will not speak to my daughter that way," he growled in heavily accented English, his machinist's hands gripping Mark's expensive tuxedo. The police officers strode down the center aisle with the authority of men who had dealt with desperate criminals before. "Mark Jablonski, Chad Miller, you're both under arrest for receipt and distribution of stolen property." As they cuffed a babbling, protesting Mark, I turned to address the stunned congregation. 300 faces stared back at me, shocked, horrified, but increasingly proud. My Babsha, sitting in the front row in her finest dress, gave me a slow, deliberate nod of approval that meant more than any applause ever could. "I'm sorry you all had to witness this," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the cathedral. "But I couldn't let this man make a mockery of everything our families hold sacred. Marriage is supposed to be built on truth, respect, and love. This man offered me none of those things." I placed Mark's phone on the altar, next to the rings that would never be exchanged, and began walking back down the aisle. As I passed each row of guests, I saw understanding dawning on their faces. The shock was giving way to something else: respect, admiration, and fierce protective love. My mother stepped into the aisle and wrapped me in her arms. "Kachem sai, Korko," she whispered. "I love you, daughter." My father joined us, his strong arms encircling both of us. "You are braver than I ever imagined," he said, his voice thick with emotion. The police found exactly what I'd told them they would find. Mark and Chad's operation was more extensive than even I had realized. They had been stealing and fencing electronics for over 2 years, with an estimated total value of over $500,000. The garage of our future home contained $75,000 worth of stolen cameras and laptops, all carefully cataloged and ready for distribution. Their warehouse contacts were arrested within hours. Mark was sentenced to 5 years in federal prison. Chad received 3 years as part of a plea deal. Mark's family lost their electronics stores when the full extent of their involvement became clear. They had been unknowingly fencing stolen goods through their legitimate business for months. The story of my wedding day justice spread through our Polish-American community like wildfire, then beyond. Local news stations picked it up, then national outlets. Social media exploded with support. Thousands of women shared their own stories of standing up to betrayal, creating a movement of courage that spread far beyond Chicago. I became known as the bride who chose truth over fairy tales, a title that both embarrassed and empowered me. My parents got most of their money back, the house purchase was canceled, and the wedding vendors, moved by my story, refunded significant portions of their fees. The cathedral donation was waived entirely, Father Kowalski explained, because truth and justice deserve a sacred space. 6 months later, I used some of the recovered money to open my own photography studio. Not in a converted garage, but in a beautiful storefront in the heart of the old Polish neighborhood. I specialize in wedding photography now, helping other couples capture the authentic joy and love that I thought I had found with Mark. I've learned that fairy tales aren't about finding a prince who rescues you. They're about having the courage to rescue yourself when the person you trusted most tries to destroy everything you hold dear. My Babsha was right about true love surviving wars and ocean crossings, but sometimes the war is fought in a cathedral, and sometimes you have to cross the ocean of your own fear to reach the other side. The white dress hangs in my closet now, not as a symbol of a failed marriage, but as armor worn in the battle for truth. And every time I look at it, I remember the moment I chose my own dignity over someone else's lies. That's a choice I'll never regret.
Anya, your raw courage in turning a wedding altar into a stage for justice shows that true power comes from confronting betrayal head-on, protecting your heritage and self-worth. It's a stark reminder that we can transform personal horror into collective strength. I'm Eliza Quinn, and remember, veils off, justice on.